The Puma Indians are some of the sickest people in the world. We never thought, oh, maybe we just poisoned them. 200 years ago, rates of obesity and diabetes were less than 1%. Food stamp budget, I think, is $112 or $15 billion a year. 70+% of that gets used on junk food. 10% of those food stamps gets used on soda. The cause of their illness is black and white.
That's what that all stems from, is the lobbyists.
I went to medical school in Tucson, Arizona, at the University of Arizona. The Puma Indians are around Tucson, Arizona. So I went and visited Puma Indian reservations when I was in medical school. The Puma Indians are some of the sickest people in the world today. The rates of obesity and diabetes are over 80 to 90%. 80 to 90%.
Wow.
Like what? Okay. And so 200 years ago, rates of obesity and diabetes were less than 1% in the Puma Indian tribe. This tribe of Native Americans has genetics that are uniquely susceptible to the environment that they find themselves in now. Ultra-processed foods, we can talk about certain things. But 200 years ago, there are pictures online of Puma Indians from 1860, right? They're fit. They have six-pack. They look like they're healthy humans. But they have a uniquely susceptible genetic makeup to becoming insulin resistant. And so what happened when the Pima Indians had this explosion of, chronic illness, after we gave them supermarkets full of Cheetos and Fritos and Takis and alcohol, is the NIH sent researchers to draw their blood to see what kind of genetics they have that make them susceptible to this chronic illness. We never thought, oh, maybe we just poisoned them, right?
Yeah.
The cause of their illness is black and white. It's absolutely black and white. And yet not once in medical school did this come up. Never once was I taught to think about this or challenged to think about this from a professor saying, what do you think about the Pima Indians? How do we help them? Like, the way to help the Pima Indians is to educate them, maybe provide, subsidies or something for them to buy single ingredient foods. But I would be willing to bet a large amount of money that if you gave the Pima Indians the foods that they ate 200 years ago, they would become healthier. And we've seen this. There have been research studies done on this. It's done with Aborigines. I forget exactly what lineage it was in Australia. The same thing happens with these indigenous people all over the world. When they eat westernized foods, which are full of seed oils, refined grains, processed sugars, pesticides, food dyes, they become ill. And the same thing is happening to westernized humans. And so when you look at this continuum of insulin resistance, multiple studies estimate that as Americans, 86 to 93% of us, 86 to 93, have at least one metric that puts us on that continuum. So diabetes is the end stage. But I would say more than 85% of Americans are on the road to diabetes. And this is the problem. And again, my assertion here very strongly would be, it's not hard to get off that train, right? It's what we eat and how we live. Majority of it is what we eat and how we live. Very, very rarely there's a genetic mutation, polymorphism that is unavoidable. This is less than 1% of humans. Most of us are very sick, and we're sick because of how we're living and eating, and because these foods are sold to us now. And then when you go to see a doctor, I was never taught to ask people about what they're eating in medical school. I was never given a single nutrition course. I was taught what drugs to prescribe for what illness. That was what's on my boards, right? So the step 1, the step 2, the step 3, this is what determines a doctor's success in life. It means what specialty you can go into, what residency, how prestigious you can go, how far you can go in medicine are your boards. There's not a single question on the board exam. I mean, I think every board exam is, I forget how many questions, it might be 1,500 questions, thousands of questions that I answered over the course of my medical career to become a licensed medical doctor. I don't remember a single question about nutrition because we were never taught that. It's not what we're held up to think about.
It's pretty alarming.
Yeah. So that's just the crazy standard that we find ourselves in. But it's important to understand that, diabetes, maybe formally diagnosed 11%, the number of people going to become diabetic, much, much higher. Because if 70% of Americans are obese and overweight, and those are two different categories of BMI, body mass index, I would argue that almost everyone, if not every single person who is obese or overweight, has some degree of insulin resistance. And this is metabolic dysfunction. And at a cellular level, this means that you can't take the food you eat and convert it into usable energy in your human body. That happens through your mitochondria. So mitochondria are these little cellular organelles that are in almost every cell of our body. Red blood cells don't have mitochondria, but everything else has mitochondria. And so this is where the energy gets made for everything we do in our life. Human life runs because of the movement of electrons. And the food that we're eating is electrons, essentially. And those electrons are passed onto intermediates, which move the electrons into the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. So that's very, very microscopic. And this is, when you eat, let's say you eat an apple or you eat a steak, that steak is giving you nutrients, it's giving you vitamins and minerals. You're getting protein, you're getting amino acids. And in the steak, you're getting mostly protein, which doesn't end up as an energy substrate, but there's fat in the steak. So fat is broken down to create these energy substrates. And if you eat an apple, you're getting glucose and fructose and sucrose. If you eat a potato, you're getting long chain polymers of glucose, like starches. And that is energy to your body. And the way that happens is that gets broken down into little smaller fragments, and those fragments donate electrons to molecules like NADH and FADH2, which move those electrons to this electron transport chain. And that electron transport chain in your mitochondria is where everything happens. Because as the electrons move down the chain, you create a potential. And hydrogen, so protons move across the inner mitochondrial membrane. I know we're very microscopic now. I'll zoom out in a second. Protons move across the inner mitochondrial membrane. And then at the end of the mitochondrial membrane, they move down a concentration gradient through this little nano motor that makes ATP. And ATP runs everything in your body. That's the energy currency of your body. That is the sort of dollars and cents of your body that your body spends on creating hormones, proteins, cellular membrane, repairing things, making DNA. You need energy to live. But that process of energy creation is impaired by the foods we eat. And that is what insulin resistance, metabolic dysfunction look like at a molecular level. So the engine of our car is being broken by the fuel we're putting in it.
Man, it sounds like just a little education could reverse this entire epidemic.
It would go a long way, and we probably need bottom up and top down. And top down, I mean, maybe governmental regulation of things that are frankly poisonous for humans. And the bottom up is mostly what I do now. Maybe I'll get to be involved in the MAHA movement and help RFK with some of this MAHA stuff, but we'll see. But the education helps people wake up. There's a really sad thing I'll tell you, that there are these places, I mentioned this earlier, there are these places in the United States called food deserts where it's difficult for people to actually access single ingredient foods, or they have to go a certain number of miles to get to an actual grocery store. Mm-hmm. And there are grocery stores. These are very rural, poor communities. If you're driving across the country, you're going to encounter these. And there are grocery stores, there are places in the States where it's difficult to find, actual meat or fruits and vegetables. But most of the food deserts are food deserts by choice, which is really sad, that people in these communities haven't been educated, don't understand, and have really been, I would say, addicted to processed food, which is very addictive. And grocery stores or corner markets in these places in the past may have carried fruit and vegetables, but nobody bought them, and they rot on the shelf. And so They become a food desert by consumer choice. So that's scary. And that actually is a very sinister testament to how addictive some of these ultra-processed foods are. That if you provide a choice in some of the poorest communities in America between a Snickers bar and Doritos, and let's say an apple or a banana or an orange, most people are going to choose the Snickers bar and the Doritos. And that is a problem. So what do we do there? That's a good question. And I'll mention this because it's relevant. So in these poorest communities, SNAP, which is food stamps, so Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, is used significantly. So at a governmental level, I think we could help things by not allowing food stamps to be able to be used to buy junk food. So I think it's the food stamp budget, I think, is $112 or $15 billion a year that goes out to people. 70+% of that gets used by people on junk food. That's the problem, right? That, I think, fixes a big part of this. If you disallow the use of food stamps for junk food, you make a big step in the right direction. Now, the argument on the other side is that that is classist, racist, or elitist because these people don't have access to foods, right? But the reason they don't have access is because they've made choices because they don't want those foods. So it's some combination, I think, of governmental programming change and actual education of people in these communities, potentially bringing them the good foods. The other thing I'll say about food stamps, which is crazy, is that 10% of those food stamps gets used on soda. You cannot make an argument to me that Coca-Cola and other sodas have any redeeming quality in human health.
Yeah.
And 10% of food stamps go toward that. So at a governmental level, a
Surprised
top-down
it's not
level.
more. Surprised it's not more than
right? So I think education could help. And I think that there's a lot of double standards. And of course, the reason for that is because Coca-Cola lobbies, right?
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, I love what you're saying about, that maybe the government should step in and only allow. But I mean, how are you going to get past the lobbyists that are paying politicians and news organizations to market the that's racist? That's, you know what I mean? I mean, because that's what that all stems from, correct? Is the lobbyists. And so to me, it seems like the only real explanation is to educate everybody on, hey, I mean, the marketing, I mean, I just watched a documentary, about half of it the other day. Amazon was a big part of it. Apple was a big part of it. How the pollution is kind of, it was talking about everything. It was talking about how the iPhones are, designed to only last for a certain amount of time. And then you get the new one and it shows how they dispose of the iPhones and the computers and how Amazon does their marketing and how it all goes into landfills, back into the ecosystem, back into our food, what we're breathing. And so, I mean, even the marketing gets tricky. So it can't even just be an education on nutrition. It's how these companies are marketing, which will constantly evolve. So you have to re-educate over and over again. And I mean, you just said it yourself with the pasture raised beef versus grass fed. I mean, I didn't know that. You know what I mean? And I get to interview people like you all the time. And so for somebody, even just a single mom out there that's just working her butt off trying to make ends meet so that she can feed her kids, I mean, she doesn't have time to listen to this. And so, I mean, I would think that, just my personal opinion and with how corrupt I know our government is, I mean, it seems like the only way to do it is to educate the people, and you won't even be able to educate them through a government program because the lobbyists will take the fucking program out of the educational system.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.